The cameras were rolling on what seemed like another routine Family Feud taping when 67-year-old Robert Bob Chen shuffled onto the stage wearing a faded work shirt and well-worn jeans, looking exactly like what he claimed to be, a retired automotive factory worker who had spent 30 years assembling car parts on a production line. But what this quiet man was about to reveal would leave Steve Harvey speechless and prove that sometimes the people who helped humanity reach for the stars are the ones who appear most grounded on Earth. It was a Tuesday afternoon at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta. Steve Harvey was in his element, that perfectly tailored Navy suit gleaming under the studio lights, his energy filling the room with the warmth that had made him America's beloved host. The Chen family from Detroit was facing off against the Williams family from Chicago, and everything seemed set for another heartwarming episode about hard-working American families. But Bob Chen wasn't just any retired factory worker. He stood at the family podium with the precise posture of someone who had worked with exact measurements his entire life, his weathered hands showing the calluses of manual labor. Yet there was something in his eyes that suggested he had seen things beyond the ordinary scope of assembly line work. When Steve introduced the family during the opening segment, Bob's responses painted a picture of humble industrial service. "So, Bob," Steve had said during introductions, "tell us about your work at the factory." "Well, Mr. Steve," Bob had replied in his soft, measured voice that carried just a hint of precision beyond what you'd expect from a line worker. "I worked at the Ford plant in Detroit for 30 years. Made car parts, mostly engine components. Nothing too fancy." 30 years, that's dedication, man. What was the most interesting thing you made? Bob had paused, a brief shadow crossing his face as if he was carefully considering his words. "Oh, you know how it is. Metal parts, precision work. I always tried to make everything exactly to specifications. When people's lives depend on what you build, you don't take shortcuts." Steve noticed something in Bob's answer. It was humble, but the phrase "when people's lives depend on what you build" seemed unusually weighty for someone talking about car engines. The game progressed normally for the first 2 rounds. The Chen family was doing well, with Bob surprising everyone by showing an unexpected knowledge of aerospace terminology and scientific concepts. But it was during the 3rd round, when the category was things that fly, that Bob's carefully maintained cover began to slip. Steve asked the question, "Name something that flies higher than an airplane." It was Bob's turn at the podium. He stepped forward with a precision that seemed almost too deliberate for a former assembly line worker, and for just a moment his humble posture disappeared entirely, replaced by the bearing of someone who had worked on projects that demanded absolute perfection. "Space vehicles," Bob said quietly, but there was something in his voice, a familiarity, a knowledge, a respect, that made the simple answer feel profound. The studio fell silent for just a beat longer than usual. Steve's eyebrows raised slightly. "Space vehicles," Steve repeated slowly. That's a very specific answer, Bob. Most people would say rockets or maybe satellites." Bob looked up at Steve, and for the first time since the cameras started rolling, his mask slipped completely. In that moment, Steve saw something in his eyes that changed everything. Not the satisfaction of a retired factory worker, but the complex pride of someone who had contributed to humanity's greatest achievements. "Mr. Steve," Bob said, his voice barely audible but carrying an authority that commanded the entire studio's attention. "Can I tell you something about space vehicles?" The audience leaned forward. There was something in Bob's tone that suggested they were about to venture into territory far more extraordinary than game show entertainment. "Of course, Bob. What do you know about space vehicles?" Bob took a deep breath, his shoulders straightening in a way that transformed his entire presence. The humble factory worker was disappearing, replaced by someone else entirely.
"I didn't really make car parts, Mr. Steve. I mean, I did later, but that wasn't what I started with. That wasn't what I was trained for."
Steve's mouth fell open slightly. "What were you trained for?" "For 30 years before the car factory, I was a precision engineer at NASA. I worked on the Apollo program. I helped build the spacecraft that took men to the moon." The studio erupted in gasps. Steve's signature stop gesture went up as he processed what he'd just heard. The Chen family was staring at Bob as if seeing him for the first time. "Bob," Steve said, walking closer to him, "are you telling me that while people thought you were making car engines, you actually helped design and build the life support systems, navigation equipment, and landing modules for Apollo 11, 12, 13, and 14? Among others, Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of contestants, heard thousands of stories, but this was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. The way Bob spoke, the calm precision, the understated authority, it was clear this wasn't fantasy. This was someone who had touched the stars. But what Bob revealed next would prove that his contribution to space exploration was just the beginning of an extraordinary story. "Mr. Steve," Bob continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon, he was using life support equipment that I helped design. When the lunar module landed, it was using systems I had worked on for 3 years." The studio was completely silent. This wasn't game show content anymore. This was listening to someone who had been part of humanity's greatest adventure. "You worked on the moon landing?" Steve repeated. "Bob, that's like being part of history." Bob looked out at his family, then back at Steve. His daughter was leaning forward, hearing details she'd never been told. His son was staring with newfound respect at the father he'd thought had spent his career on a simple assembly line. The oxygen recycling system in the command module, the pressure regulation for the spacesuits, the backup navigation computer that saved Apollo 13. Bob's voice was steady as he listed achievements that had been classified years after the missions. Each component had to work perfectly. One failure could mean astronauts never coming home. Steve stopped moving entirely. "Bob, when you say you worked on Apollo 13, the mission that almost didn't make it back, I was part of the team that designed the backup systems that brought them home. We worked for 72 hours straight, recalculating everything, redesigning components in real time. The whole world was watching, and we couldn't let those men die in space." The cameras caught Steve's expression changing from amazement to something deeper, a recognition that he was standing in the presence of someone who had literally helped save astronauts' lives and contributed to one of humanity's most defining moments. "Bob, how many Apollo missions did you work on?" Bob shifted slightly, and for the first time, a hint of pride crossed his face. "I worked on components for Apollo 8 through Apollo 17, the last manned mission to the moon. After that, I transitioned to the Space Shuttle program." The studio erupted again. Steve's mouth was hanging open. "The Space Shuttle program too?" Steve asked. "Bob, do you understand what you're telling me? You're not a factory worker, you're like a space pioneer." "I had a good team," Bob said modestly, "and I was good at making things work under pressure. When astronauts are depending on your work, you learn to get everything right the first time." But Steve was just getting started in understanding the magnitude of Bob's hidden career. "Bob, your family, did they know what you really did?" Bob shook his head. "The Apollo program was classified. Even after the missions, we weren't supposed to talk about the technical details. By the time I could have said something, it seemed like ancient history. When I retired from NASA, I needed work, so I went to Ford. Seemed easier to just say I was a factory worker." The cameras caught the Chen family's expressions: shock, pride, and a dawning understanding of why their husband and father had sometimes seemed to know impossibly complex things about science and engineering. But what Bob revealed next would prove that his space career had consequences that lasted long after the missions ended. "Mr. Steve," Bob said, "there's something else, something I've carried for all these years." Steve sensed they were approaching something even deeper. "What's that, Bob?" "When you work on spacecraft, you meet the astronauts. You see them training, preparing to risk their lives on equipment you're building. Some of them didn't make it back from failed missions or training accidents." Steve's expression softened. "What did you do?" "For the past 20 years, I've been visiting the families of astronauts who died in service, making sure their children know how brave their parents were, how much their sacrifice meant to the program. Some of those kids are adults now, working in aerospace because of stories I told them about their parents. The studio was completely silent. Steve Harvey, who had made a career of quick wit and perfect timing, was speechless. How many families, Bob? 14 families. 23 children who lost parents to space exploration. Kids who needed to know that their mom or dad died doing something that advanced all of humanity. Steve removed his navy suit jacket without a word and walked to Bob. He draped it around the older man's shoulders with the reverence usually reserved for military honors. "Bob," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just work on spacecraft. You've been honoring the people who flew them for 20 years. But Bob wasn't finished. The walls of secrecy were crumbling, and more of his story emerged. "There's one more thing, Mr. Steve. The reason I came on this show." Steve, still processing everything he'd learned, looked at Bob expectantly. "Last month I got a call from Neil Armstrong's son, Eric. He's an aerospace engineer now, and he'd been researching the technical teams behind Apollo 11. He found my name on some declassified documents." Bob's voice broke slightly. "He called to thank me, said he wanted to meet the man who helped his father walk on the moon. He's flying to Detroit next week, and I wanted my family to know why that meeting matters." Steve Harvey knelt down in front of Bob Chen, right there on the Family Feud stage in front of millions of viewers. "Bob," Steve said, "in 40 years of television, I have never met anyone who represents the best of human achievement the way you do. You helped put man on the moon, and then you spent 13 years making sure the families of space heroes knew their sacrifices mattered." The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. But Steve had one more surprise for Bob. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve announced, "I'm going to do something I've never done before. Bob Chen, you don't need to win money on this show to prove you're extraordinary. You already helped humanity reach the moon." Steve pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. "NASA Johnson Space Center. This is Steve Harvey from Family Feud. I need to speak with someone about honoring a very special Apollo program engineer." Within minutes, the current NASA administrator was on speakerphone, confirming what Bob had been too modest to emphasize. He was legendary among aerospace engineers as one of the most precise and innovative designers in NASA history. "Engineer Chen," came the voice through the speakers, "your work on the Apollo life support system saved countless astronaut lives. Your emergency designs for Apollo 13 are still studied by our engineers today." The episode that aired became one of the most shared Family Feud moments in the show's history. But more importantly, it sparked a national conversation about the hidden heroes of the space program and the unsung engineers who humanity's greatest adventure possible. Bob's story inspired the creation of the Hidden Apollo Heroes Foundation, which helps identify and honor the engineers, technicians, and support staff whose names were never in the headlines but whose work made space exploration possible. Eric Armstrong became the foundation's first major advocate, working with Bob to document the stories of other forgotten space program contributors. Today, Bob Chen still lives quietly in Detroit, but now he does it without the burden of secrecy. His NASA career is celebrated at local schools where he speaks about the space program, inspiring a new generation of engineers and scientists. Every July 20th, on the anniversary of the moon landing, he receives calls from aerospace engineers around the world who want to thank him for his contributions to space exploration. Steve Harvey often tells the story of Bob Chen when he speaks about hidden greatness. "I thought I was meeting a factory worker," Steve says. "Instead, I met someone who helped humanity take its greatest step, then spent decades honoring the people brave enough to take that step." The jacket Steve gave Bob that day hangs in his modest home office, next to photos of Apollo missions and letters from astronaut families, a reminder that sometimes the people who help us reach for the stars are the ones who are most humble on Earth. Bob Chen proved that heroes don't always wear spacesuits or have their names in history books. Sometimes they wear work shirts and keep quiet about their role in humanity's greatest achievements, spending their retirement making sure the world remembers the astronauts who risked everything to expand human knowledge.